At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. The dead omnicore lay on the cafeteria table like a tombstone for a gnat. A sleek, sealed unit of Concord issue composite, its matte surface absorbed the overhead lights, creating a patch of void on the table. Its creators deemed repair an inefficient relic. Failed units were replaced, not fixed. "It's dead," Nico said, poking the dark screen. As a freshman, his entire world existed within a device like this, and its death was a personal cataclysm. He deflated, his posture sinking. Just went dark. The screen is inert, a blank rectangle of glass. Across the table, Rena leaned forward, her expression a clear challenge. "Bet it's beyond your skills to fix, Leon." Leon Corrigan looked down, peeling the label off his soda bottle in a single continuous spiral. He preferred the quiet company of a stripped gearbox or a misbehaving circuit board. Social dynamics had more moving parts than a planetary gear system and operated on implicit rules that remained opaque to him. "It's a sealed unit with a seamless case." "So?" Rena grinned. "That's just an invitation to be clever." He sighed, a quiet, resigned exhalation. Melting the Omnicore's perfectly good components was a grating, wasteful inefficiency. He held out a hand, fixing his gaze on the bottle. "Give it." The chatter around them subsided. The small group of students who orbited Leon's usual lunch spot, the ones who appreciated his particular competence, leaned in. Leon turned the Omnicore over in his hands, mapping its surface with his fingers. A fractional give near the audio port revealed a slight tolerance flaw in the casing's molding, a manufacturing shortcut. He glanced at Nico's lunch tray. "Need your fork." He also snagged a paperclip from the stack of papers Rena was grading for Mr. Arden and a stick of gum from his own pocket. He unbent the paperclip, straightening one end into a fine probe. He inserted it into the tiny pinhole for the microphone, applied light pressure, and a faint click answered. With his thumbnail, he worked the newly created scene, popping the front plate away from the chassis with a series of soft snaps. The conversations at nearby tables faltered as other students turned to watch. Inside, the device was a dense collage of microcomponents. Leon scanned the layout, tracing the power lines from the battery. He spotted the problem. A tiny connector the size of a grain of rice had worked itself loose from its socket, a common vibration issue on this model. "Fork," he grunted. Nico handed it over. Leon used a tine's edge, pressing it into the microscopic gap between the connector and the socket. He levered it back into place, his hand rock steady, applying controlled force honed by years of patient tinkering. He then pointed to a spot on the board. "And there's your problem. A fried circuit trace. A hairline fracture, blackened at the edges." He unwrapped his stick of gum, popped it in his mouth, and meticulously flattened the foil paper on the table. With a thumbnail, he tore off a tiny sliver, a millimeter wide. He folded it twice, creating a minuscule conductive bridge. He placed it over the broken trace, holding his breath. A sloppy, temporary fix. A dirty patch, but it would work. He snapped the faceplate back on. Under 2 minutes passed since he had taken the device. He slid the Omnicore back across the table to Nico. "Try it now." Nico pressed the power stud. The screen flickered, then bloomed to life with the Concorde's swirling geometric logo. Few people clapped, others cheered. Nico gaped, staring from the glowing screen to Leon as if witnessing a miracle. Leon just shrugged and returned his attention to his soda bottle, already searching with his fingers for a new project. So focused on his task, he missed the Kylan exchange student watching him from across the bustling cafeteria. Tasha Zoe, Kylan exchange student, stood with a tray, a cultured Kylan nutrient broth and fibrous Terran greens. She bypassed the resurrected Omnicore and focused entirely on Leon's hand. She observed the way his thumb braced against the casing, the way he'd guided the paperclip with his index finger, the pincer grip he had used with the fork tine. Her limbs, a pale celadon green, moved with liquid economy, ending in wrist from which 2 long, flexible grasp tendrils sprouted. They were strong, perfect for securing a tool or bracing against a support beam, but the independent motor control she had just witnessed was a biological revelation. She turned to the other Kylan beside her, her voice a soft melodic hum that the small disc on her collar translated into crisp English. "Did you see that? The first digit's articulation is extraordinary." The other Kylan looked where she was pointing. Leon was now idly rolling a coin across his knuckles of his free hand. It seems inefficient. So many small movements for a simple task." "No," Tesha said, her eyes wide with academic fascination. "It is control. It is art." Leon's sanctuary was the library after school, a nook in the nonfiction stacks between aging manuals on internal combustion engines and theoretical texts on gravitic plating. The air smelled of old paper and dust, a comforting aroma that grounded him. A figure blocked his light. He looked up into Tesha Zoe's serene face. The twilight sky-colored robe she wore accentuated her height. She crossed the worn linoleum in silence, her robes whispering against the floor. "Leon Corgan," she said. Her translator rendered her voice with the same calm, formal musicality as before. She performed a measured tilt of her head, a Kylan gesture of polite introduction. Leon just nodded. "Hey. I observed your procedure during lunch," she continued, looking down at his hands. He curled them into loose fists at his sides. "I studied Terran biomechanics. Your texts detail the musculature, but they omit the nuance of its application." He searched for a response. "Okay. May I?" she asked, gesturing toward his hand instead of his notebook. He hesitated, then uncurled his right hand and placed it palm up on the table. Permanent lines of grease etched his palm, and his fingertips were a landscape of calluses and tiny, healed-over cuts. Tesha leaned closer, her own grasped tendrils hovering just above his palm. Her usually coiled tendrils twitched with interest. "The first carpometacarpal saddle joint," she murmured, as if reciting from a textbook. "It allows for a range of motion, flexion, extension, adduction, abduction, and circuminduction, and opposition." She looked up, her expression one of dawning realization. "That is the key, correct?" To demonstrate, Leon tapped his thumb to the tip of each of his fingers in sequence. Tesha let out a soft, breathy sound. "Astonishing. The thinner eminence provides the necessary force, but the control is neurological, a symphony of minute electrical impulses." Heat rose in his neck. The clinical poetry of her description was startling. He reflexively picked up the coin from the table and rolled it across his knuckles back and forth, a smooth, ingrained motion. Tesha's focus sharpened. "Localized kinetic poetry," she whispered. The awe in her voice made Leon stop, the coin clattering on the table. "It's just a coin trick," he said. "To you, perhaps," she replied, straightening up. "To a species that manipulates the world with powerful grasping motions, it is a revelation. The sheer level of independent digital control is biological foundation for your entire technological framework, correct? From writing implements to your most complex machines." Leon shrugged, at a loss. I guess we just use our hands." He picked up his pencil and returned to his sketch. Tesha gave another measured head tilt. "Thank you for the demonstration, Leon Corgan. The demonstration was enlightening." She turned and departed as silently as she had arrived. A strange sense of exposure prickled his skin, as if someone had just dissected his most private, mundane habit and put it on display at a museum. The summons arrived the next morning via an austere official message on his Omnicore. "Leon Corgan is to report to the Office of Direct Sound, ISEP Administrator at 0900 hours. Director Sound's office was an exercise in sensory deprivation. The walls, floor, and ceiling were a uniform matte white. Her desk gray and her chair's chrome trim were the only other colors. The still air held only the atmospheric purifier's sterile metallic scent and its low hum. Director Seln was a Gildan, a biped from a high-gravity world. Her body was a column of interlocking fibrous segments that moved with ponderous deliberation. Each of her two thick appendages terminated in a hardened, blunt pad built for leverage and brute force. She stood behind her desk, a monolith of order. "Lian Corgan," she said, her voice a monotone, each word spaced with deliberate regularity. "I have received several reports regarding your activities." Lian waited. "Firstly," she began, and a cold weight settled in Lian's stomach. The word "firstly" always meant trouble. "You performed an unsanctioned modification of Concord issue property. This is a violation of ISCP Regulation 113.8 pertaining to device tampering." She paused. Lian remained silent. "Secondly, there are multiple accounts of you and your peers engaging in what you call manualities. These include high-velocity object manipulation," she meant pen spinning, "unsanctioned lock-picking exercises, and the rapid competitive assembly of puzzle constructs." "They're just games," Lian said, his voice quiet. "They are unregulated variables," Seln corrected him. "They introduce chaos into a structured learning environment. An unregulated student project at the Mirren Exchange resulted in significant diplomatic fallout. I will prevent a repeat here. I have a report from the school's nurse detailing 2 cases of sprained thumbs among younger students attempting to emulate your trickery." A muscle jumped in Lian's jaw. "Consider this a formal warning," Seln concluded. "All activities classified as manualities are to cease immediately, pending a full risk assessment by my department. The ISCP's primary directive is to ensure a safe, standardized, and predictable educational exchange. Your actions are contrary to that directive. You may go." She made a curt, heavy nod with her segmented head. Lian stood up and left the sterile office, the door sliding shut with a pneumatic sigh. His mind bypassed the warning and focused on the problem. A system, illogical and restrictive, now constrained him. And like any poorly designed system, Lian Corgan already plotted how to fix it. The next day, the cafeteria was louder than usual, a current of rebellion running through the scattered groups of students. News of Seln's warning spread, and students responded with rebellion instead of compliance. Rena and Nico set up what they dramatically dubbed the Manualities Gauntlet. "This is a cultural demonstration," Rena told Lian with a wink. Lian first wanted to avoid it, but the freshman's sullen expressions with bandaged thumbs and the expectant faces of his friends held him fast. He had started this. He had to show them why it mattered. A Signin puzzle box, a simple tumbler lock mounted on a board, a length of rope, a deck of cards, and a second shuffled deck lay on the table. "The gauntlet," Nico announced to the gathered crowd. 10 tasks. Solve the puzzle box, pick the lock, tie 5 different knots: bowline, clove hitch, square knot, sheep shank, and taut line hitch. Then, build a 5-tier card tower. Last, take the shuffle deck, separate it by suit, stack them in order, ace to king, and perform a flawless triple pharaoh shuffle to reintegrate them. Ready? Someone raised a phone, its camera lens gleaming, displaying a timer on its screen. The familiar pressure settled on him as he looked at the expectant faces. He flexed his fingers, the familiar stretch and pull of tendons centering him, and nodded. Go! His focus contracted to the items on the table, the crowd fading to a muted roar. He traced patterns on the puzzle box with his fingers, sliding panels and depressing hidden buttons in a sequence committed to muscle memory. It sprang open in 8 seconds. He snatched up the lockpicks, applying minute tension to the cylinder with his left hand, while his right hand's pick probed the pins. Seeking the sheer line with delicate taps. Click, 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 the lock popped open. 15 seconds. He moved to the rope, his hands flowing from one task to the next, leaving finished knots in their wake. Bowline, clove hitch, square knot. Each knot was perfect, dressed and tight. 30 seconds. The card tower rose, a delicate architecture of balanced tension, his touch so light the cards floated into place. 45 seconds. He grabbed the shuffle deck, his thumbs riffling through the cards while he caught flashes of red and black. He sorted them into 4 piles, a flurry of red and black that drew a gasp from an onlooker. Then, stacking them in order, the last, most difficult part, the Pharaoh Shuffle, required him to split the deck into 2 perfect halves, then weave them together card by card. He did it 3 times, the cards weaving together in a smooth whisper of sound. He slapped the perfectly squared deck onto the table. "Done!" Nico shouted. The time on the phone read 58.3 seconds. A roar went up from the students. Someone filmed the entire thing. And before the bell rang for the next period, the clip rocketed across the school's social network. It spread beyond the school. 2 days later, halfway across the galaxy, a Gildan cultural attaché reviewed routine data streams from various Concord exchange programs. The video of Leon's gauntlet appeared on his monitor, flagged by an algorithm for unusual displays of interspecies interaction. The video played once, then he replayed it, his segmented face a rigid mask. The screen showed the blur of human hands, the effortless control, the mastery over a dozen complex physical tasks in under a minute. He compared it to the slow, deliberate movements of his own people, to their reliance on heavy tools and brute force engineering. The video was more than a student's party trick, a statement, a powerful yet artless display of biological superiority that cast his own species as ponderous and limited. Sometime later, a formal complaint dripping with diplomatic outrage arrived at the stellar Concord. It cited the Interspecies Scholastic Exchange Program for promoting displays of biological chauvinism that were insulting and undermined the principle of interspecies equality. The complaint landed with metaphorical weight of collapsing star directly on Director Sound's desk. The all-school assembly was mandatory. Director Sound stood at the podium in the auditorium, her form a rigid column of authority. The low murmur of unhappy students filled the large hall. Sound ignored. "Effective immediately," she announced, her amplified monotone echoing through the auditorium. "The administration places a temporary moratorium on all unregulated manual contest and dexterity displays. We will distribute a comprehensive list of approved recreational activities." A low groan rippled through the human students. "This decision rests on 2 factors," Sound continued, speaking over the disruption. "Firstly, a statistical analysis of minor injuries directly correlated to these activities. Secondly, a recent intergalactic diplomat incident which has jeopardized the standing of our partners and threatened the ISCP's program's future itself." She gazed across the students, lingering for a moment on Leon. A hot mix of guilt and anger rose in his throat. "Furthermore," Sound said, "such activities create unnecessary social hierarchies based on innate biological differences. They are exclusionary by nature. The ISCP's goal is to foster unity through shared, accessible experiences. Approved activities will include symmetrical pattern contemplation, group tonal humming, and cooperative atmospheric moisture condensation tracking." This time, the groan was a full-throated chorus of teenage despair. Leon stared at his hands, tightened into fist in his lap. He was the kid who got recess canceled for everyone. Leon hid in the shop class, the only place he considered his own territory anymore. The familiar sense of cut wood and conductive flux usually comforted him, but angry thoughts swarmed his head, a furious, insistent buzz. He sanded a block of maple wood with furious, pointless energy. This is an illogical outcome. He looked up. Tesha stood in the doorway, her green skin glowing in the dusty shafts of afternoon light. "She can't just ban it," he muttered, continuing ascending. "They're just hobbies." "They are more than that," Tesha said, gliding into the room. "They are a form of cultural expression. Suppressing such an expression directly contradicts the ISCP's stated mission of fostering interspecies understanding." Leon stopped sanding and looked at her. "Yeah, well, try telling her that." I believe we should, Tesha said, her expression serious. She tapped one of her tendrils against her chin, a gesture of deep thought. Director Sound operates within a rigid framework of rules and bureaucracy. To argue against her is futile. We must use the framework itself. Leon gave her a skeptical look. How? We will petition to certify manualities as an official interspecies cultural sport, she explained, gaining momentum. Under Concord Bylaw 428, student-led initiatives for cultural exchange must receive formal consideration. We will write a proposal. We will codify the rules, create safety protocols, and demonstrate its educational and cultural value. We will force her to evaluate it on its merits, instead of her reflexive dismissal of chaos. Leon stared at her. The idea was audacious, complicated, and would involve meetings, paperwork, and public speaking. Everything he hated. He just wanted to tinker in peace. He wanted things to return to normal. This is about more than your quiet tinkering, Leon Corgan, Tesha said in a low voice, her observation so accurate he flinched. Your actions have made this a symbol. To concede now is to accept the judgment that your culture's unique skills are a liability. He looked at his hands, at the calluses and scars. They were his strength, a part of him. They were how he understood the world. He looked up at Tesha's steady, intelligent gaze. All right, he said, the word feeling heavier than it should. What's the first step? The first step was a dead end. Leon sat on the loading dock behind the shop, staring at a dozen deleted drafts of a manualities rulebook on his Omnicore. Every rule he wrote sounded stupid. Rule 1, keep your eyes safe. Rule 2, participants must have 5 or fewer digits per hand. Quantifying something based on feel and improvisation was wrong. He slammed the Omnicore down in frustration and picked up a whittling knife and a block of scrap wood, his hands needing a real problem. He carved away slivers, carving aimlessly, just letting the blade follow the grain. The rhythmic squeak of a wheelbarrow broke his concentration. Boren, the school's groundskeeper, ambled into view. He was a Holdren, a species of towering ursine bipeds covered in shaggy brown fur. His massive hands ended in thick fingers tipped with blunt claws, built for leverage and crushing strength. The students called him the Shaggy Man, and rumors abound that he could fix the school's aging tractor engine with his bare hands. Boren stopped his wheelbarrow and watched Leon for a moment, his gaze thoughtful on his broad, furred face. He grunted. Oh. Leon just nodded at him, the frustration draining out of him in the Holdren's presence. Boren reached into the wheelbarrow and pulled out a small piece of worn-out pine. He held it in his massive, calloused hand. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pressed one of his broad thumbs into the soft wood, leaving a deep, smooth groove in its surface. The simple movement held startling power. He handed the piece of wood to Leon. He rumbled, his deep bass voice vibrating in Leon's chest. Write its purpose, he said. Forget the rules. Then, with another grunt, he picked up the handles of his wheelbarrow and continued on his way, leaving Leon staring at the thumbprint in the wood. Purpose. A new word echoed in his head, unlocking something. The key was defining purpose over restriction. It's an art form, Leon said, sliding a new proposal across the library table to Tesha. A practical art form. Tesha read the title. Proposal for the establishment of a manual arts exhibition and tournament, a study in comparative biomechanics and kinetic problem solving. She looked up at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. This is brilliant. Working together, they drafted a document that was a masterpiece of bureaucratic judo. They filled it with phrases lifted directly from the ISCP Charter. It cited Concord bylaws about cultural preservation and student-led academic inquiry. It framed the entire tournament as a research project. They would generate valuable data on the diverse ways different species approached physical challenges. They submitted it directly to Director Sound's office. A day passed, then another. On the third morning, a summons brought them back to the sterile white office. Sound stood behind her desk, holding their tablet. "Your proposal is well articulated," she said, the closest she would probably ever come to giving a compliment. "It exploits several administrative loopholes I now see I must amend." Leon's hopes plunged. "However," she continued, "under the current bylaws, I am obligated to consider it. I approve the exhibition on a provisional basis." Leon and Tasha exchanged a wide-eyed, victorious glance. "With conditions," Sound added, her tone hardened. "I will personally oversee and inspect every aspect of the event. Any safety violation, however minor, will result in the permanent disbanding of this manual arts program and immediate academic probation for its organizers. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, Director," Tasha said with a graceful nod. Leon just nodded. They had one move. In the weeks before the tournament, the school changed. What was a niche hobby became a movement. Leon, to his own bewildered surprise, became its reluctant leader. He and Tasha held signs up in the gym. Human students, freed from the ban, formed teams with names like the Locksmiths, the Card Sharks, and the Origami Guard. They worked in hallways, and during lunch, a quiet rebellion of clicking puzzle boxes and shuffling cards. To Tasha's academic delight, several students from other species joined as well. Phalanti, a willowy being whose 6 slender limbs could pivot from multiple points along its torso, proved a prodigy at cat's cradle. It wove complex patterns with its 3-fingered hands that left the human students mesmerized. Another Kylan, encouraged by Tasha, discovered that by using 2 of her tendrils in tandem, she could approximate a pincer grip. She was slower than a human, but her steadiness in stacking challenges was unparalleled. Leon found himself in the unexpected role of coach. He spoke little, instead walking up to a struggling student, taking their hands in his, and physically guiding them through the motion. "You're fighting the tension," he'd murmured to a student fumbling with a knot. "Let the rope do the work. It's about muscle memory," he'd explained to someone trying to master a coin roll. "Do it slow 1,000 times before you try it fast once." He taught the principles behind the tricks: tendon glide, friction control, and distribution of force. He taught them the purpose, and they listened. For the first time, the thing that always isolated him connected him to others. In the weeks before the tournament, the school changed. What was a niche hobby became a movement. Leon, to his own bewildered surprise, became its reluctant leader. On tournament day, the gymnasium hummed with the excited chatter of students. Banners made an art class hung from the rafters. Director Sound stood on the sidelines, a tablet in her hand, her segmented face impassive. Tasha opened the ceremony with an eloquent speech about the dialogue of digits and kinetic diplomacy. Leon followed her at the podium, cleared his throat, and mumbled, "Avoid sprains. Keep your eyes safe. Have fun." The students cheered anyway. The first events were a resounding success. The speed knotting competition saw a dozen students from different species replicating complex selling knots projected on a large screen. The micro-sculpting challenge had teams creating miniature sculptures out of standardized blocks of clay. Leon saw a perfect tiny dragon, a complex geometric shape, and a surprisingly detailed replica of the school's skimmer. The first round centerpiece was the team-based chain reaction machine. Each team received a box of miscellaneous junk: dominoes, marbles, mousetraps, string, and assorted cafeteria utensils, and had to build a machine to perform a simple task, like ringing a bell. The gym filled with a cacophony of invention: the clatter of falling dominoes, the snap of mousetraps, and the triumphant cheers of teams whose contraptions worked. Loud, messy, and beautiful. Director Sound moved through the activity. She jotted several notes in her tablet, but the event ran with perfect safety. The first round concluded flawlessly, and as the students celebrated, Leon caught Sound's eye, and the rigid set of her jaw told him This was only the first move. Before the first bell the following morning, a new set of regulations appeared, posted on every bulletin board and sent to every student's Omnicore. Director Sound's office issued them. Effective immediately, all participants in the Manual Arts exhibition had to wear standardized Concord-issue safety gloves. Furthermore, all tools and materials used in the events required Concord certification. This single rule disqualified nearly every student's personal lockpicking set, customized card decks, and puzzle boxes. The gloves were the real killer. They were bulky, five-fingered gauntlets designed for industrial work. For the human students, they were a clumsy inconvenience, making delicate tasks a clumsy struggle. But for the other participants, they were an instrument of exclusion. The five-finger gloves immobilized the Volantes limbs with their unique articulation, and for the Kylans, the thick, unyielding material rendered their sensitive grasp tendrils useless. Tasha, her tendrils coiled tight at her wrist, confronted Sound in the hallway.
"This is a transparent act of sabotage, Director. You're using safety regulations to undermine the spirit of inclusivity this event fosters." "Safety standards are universal, Mrs. Zoe," Sound replied, her monotone voice calm. "If a participant's biology prevents compliance, that is an unfortunate but necessary exclusion." She was technically correct, and with that, the tournament stalled. The previous day's vibrant energy vanished. The hallways fell quiet, the students sullen and defeated. Leon and Tasha sat on the bleachers in the empty gymnasium. The colorful banners hanging from the ceiling mocked them. The chain reaction machines left where they stood looked like forgotten monuments to a failed idea. "I'm sorry," Leon said, breaking the silence. "I got you into this. I should have just left it alone." "You should be proud for defending your culture," Tasha said, her voice soft but firm. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you know what my people are famous for, Leon? We built worlds. Our history is one of grand, sweeping achievements, megastructures that span continents, planetary engineering projects that redirected rivers and raised mountains. We think on a colossal scale." She held up one of her arms, letting her two grasp tendrils uncoil. "These are for that. For gripping heavy levers, for securing girders, for operating machinery that moves continents. Our tools are extensions of that philosophy. Powerful, large, unsubtle. We esteem the grand, the communal, the monumental." She reached out, the tip of her tendril gently touching the back of his hand. The contact was surprisingly warm. "We built worlds with levers and cranes," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You built a civilization with this." Leon looked down at his own hand, at the intricate network of bones, muscles, and tendons beneath the skin. "To a species like the Gildan," Tasha continued, "a society founded on unbreakable systems and immutable plans, human improvisation is terrifying. Director Sound fears the unknown variable, the one piece that defies accounting, the loose gear that can topple a perfect clockwork system. She fears your hands because their actions defy prediction." She fell silent, her gaze distant. She looked at her own tendrils, then back at Leon's hand resting on the bleacher. Her expression shifted. The academic curiosity from the library had deepened into something like awe. She looked at Leon, and the translator relayed her quiet, wondering question. "They have opposable thumbs?" The question hung in the silent gymnasium. It transcended biology, encompassing everything. Leon stared at his own thumb, at the way it could pivot and press against his other fingers. He had always seen it as a simple tool, a thing he'd use without thought. For the first time, he understood its truth. The source code for an entire way of being, a biological gift for beautiful, unpredictable chaos.
As a bizarre sort of consolation prize, Director Sound mandated that all tournament organizers, which now apparently included anyone who had signed up, attend a geological survey trip. The stated purpose was to emphasize safe, structured learning in a controlled outdoor environment. The unstated purpose, Leon suspected, was to induce submission through boredom. They traveled in the Wayfarer, the school's aging skimmer, a functional if temperamental piece of machinery. As Leon found a seat, a faint acrid smell like scorched ceramic and hot plastic reached him. A high-frequency vibration in the deck plates made his teeth buzz with a worrying frequency. The skimmer's maintenance record was fiction, but he kept his concerns to himself. Tasha sat beside him, reviewing geological data on her Omnicore. Director Sound sat near the front, a paragon of rigid posture. A dozen other students, a mix of human and alien, scattered themselves throughout the cabin. The skimmer lifted off, ascending toward a series of flat-topped mesas that scarred the horizon. They flew over the canyon's deepest part, a jagged red wound in the earth thousands of feet deep, when it happened. A heavy bang echoed through the cabin like a sledgehammer hitting the hull. The skimmer lurched violently to one side, throwing everyone against their restraints. Red emergency lights pulsed, bathing the interior in a crimson glare as alarms shrieked. The engine's steady hum died, replaced by the sound of wind rushing through the cabin. They remained aloft. The skimmer's emergency magnetic brakes fired, catching them on a narrow, crumbling ledge of rock on the canyon wall. But the jolt snapped an aft mooring clamp on the landing gear. The entire vessel tilted precariously, dangling, half on, half off the ledge, groaning under its own weight. Main power was dead. The comms hissed with useless static. They hung suspended over a fatal drop, stranded in a tin can held in place by a thread. A student screamed, and the sound broke the tension, sending a wave of panic through the cabin. Director Sound, true to form, immediately bellowed for order.
Remain calm.
She boomed, steady as ever.
Emergency Protocol 83 states all passengers are to remain seated and await instructions from a certified crew member.
But they were on their own, and the protocols assumed a skimmer with functioning systems. The groaning of stressed metal intensified as the skimmer slipped another few inches over the edge. Leon's mind, however, analyzed the alarms, the smell, the vibration. It all clicked into place. Primary lift coil overload, a chain reaction failure in the power bus. The sheared mooring clamp meant their only anchor point was the damaged landing strut, now taking all the weight. He looked out the viewport and saw the broken mooring cable whipping in the wind. An idea sparked in his head, a desperate, stupid, brilliant idea. He unbuckled his restraint.
Everyone on the cabin's far side!
He snapped, his voice cut through the noise.
Now! We need to shift the weight away from the edge! Colgan, sit down! This is a direct violation of...
Leon bypassed Sound, moving toward the emergency locker at the cabin's rear. He yanked the latch. Flares, medkits, and a coil of synthetic rope lay inside. He grabbed the rope. Sound loomed right behind him.
Regulations require a certified technician to handle emergency equipment. Is there one here?
Leon shot back, his focus on the equipment.
Because if there is, he's doing a lousy job.
He found a solid-looking rock outcropping about 30 feet from the skimmer. Their only hope lay in securing the vessel to it. He needed a knot that would tighten under load, one he could tie from a distance, a taut line hitch, an archaic knot from the age of sailing ships, detailed in an old engineering book he read a dozen times. He formed the loops and turns of the knot on their own, a sequence he performed thousands of times. The knot formed in seconds. He braced himself against the bulkhead, gauged the wind, and threw. The rope sailed out, uncoiling in a clean arc, and settled neatly over the outcropping. He pulled it taut, and the hitch bit into the rock, holding fast. A second anchor. The rope held, but the victory was brief. A loud crack echoed from below. The damaged landing strut buckled under the strain.
The wall panels!
Leon yelled, pointing.
Pry one off! We need to split the strut!
Two bigger human students, their faces tight with fear but spurred by Leon's certainty, jammed their fingers into the seams of an interior wall panel and tore it free.
Belts! Give me your belts!
He directed them, using the metal panel as a splint and their belts, plus his own torn shirt, as bindings. He explained where to apply the tension, how to use leverage to counteract the shearing force. The desperate, ugly fix lessened the groaning from the strut. They achieved stability, for now, but remained invisible.
The emergency beacon,
Tessa said, her voice steady.
The control panel is dead.
Leon was already there, prying the panel open with his fingers. The inside was a mess of fried circuits. A direct overload had melted the board into a ruin, but he could bypass it.
"Tasha, your hairpins," he said, his gaze fixed on the wiring. "The metallic ones."
She handed them over without a word. Adrenaline sang in his veins, but he held his hand steady. He used one pin to scrape away the insulating coating on the main battery lead and the transmitter wire. With the other, he created a delicate bridge between the two contacts. A direct bypass connecting the battery straight to the beacon's transmitter. Dangerous. It could fry the whole system. Sparks flew. For a tenth second, the board remained dark. Then, a small green light on the beacon flared to life. They broadcast. Just then, the skimmer gave another violent lurch. A smaller Kylan student, who helped brace the splint, lost his footing on the tilted floor. He slid, ropes tangling around them, directly toward the open, damaged main hatch. Tess's tendrils shot out, but they slipped on the student's smooth robes. Leon lunged. He shot his hand out, and he clenched his fingers around a fistful of the student's robe. His thumb locked down over his knuckles. The unique friction pads of his fingerprints gave him the crucial purchase Tess's smooth tendrils slid past. The grip held. He strained, a burning sensation in his arm and shoulder as he slipped, until two other students could grab him and help haul the terrified Kylan back to safety. The entire sequence, the knot, the splint, the bypass, the grip, took less than 5 minutes. Director Sound watched it all, her rigid, segmented jaw slightly ajar. For the first time in her meticulously ordered life, a pair of human hands solved a problem with the beautiful, terrifying chaos of improvisation. The thrum of approaching rescue skimmers was the most beautiful sound Leon had ever heard. Soon, rescue crews secured the crippled wayfarer with magnetic grapples and evacuated everyone to a larger transport shuttle. A grizzled human crew tech, inspecting Leon's handiwork before crews prepped the wayfarer for salvage, just shook his head in amazement. He looked at the taut line hitch, the jury-rigged splint, and the scorched hairpin bridge beacon. "Kid's got good hands," he said to the supervising official. "Whoever he is, his quick and dirty fixes are the only reason we're doing a rescue instead of a recovery." They rode back to the school in silence. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. Leon leaned his head against the cool window, watching the landscape slide by. Tasha sat beside him, one of her tendrils wrapped lightly yet securely around his arm. Across the aisle, Director Sound sat alone, staring at their thick, blunt appendages. She looked at them as a limitation. The summons came with the next day's light. Leon expected expulsion, or at least a disciplinary hearing that would leave a permanent mark on his record. This time, Tasha insisted on coming with him. They walked into the sterile white office. It looked the same, but the atmosphere was different. Sound stood in the middle of the room, waiting for them. "I have spent the last 12 hours reviewing my reports on the Wayfarer incident," she began, her monotone voice holding a new timbre, a subtle shift in resonance that conveyed respect. "I also reviewed my assessment of manual odds. I have concluded that I predicated my analysis on a flawed risk assessment model." Leon and Tasha exchanged a cautious look. "My model," Sound continued, "accounted only for the risk of improvisation in a stable system. It excluded scenarios where the system has already failed and improvisation becomes the key survival variable. This was a critical oversight." She walked to her desk, picked up a tablet, and pressed one of her blunt pads to its surface. A loud thump echoed from the tablet. "I am officially and permanently rescinding the ban on manual arts," she declared. "Furthermore, I am submitting a proposal to the ISEP board to create a new mandatory course for all exchange participants." She looked directly at Leon. "I will call it Applied Interspecies Manual Arts. Its purpose is to codify, quantify, and standardize the variables of manual improvisation in order to mitigate future unlocked risk factors. I am asking you both to co-design the curriculum." Leon could only stare, speechless. She tried to turn this chaos into a system. This was the most Director Sound thing she could possibly do. and in that moment, he almost liked her for it. Several weeks into the new term, a strange new energy filled the shop class. The scents of cut wood and hot solder now mingled with the faint, cool stone scent of Kylan robes and the earthy aroma of a flianti. Leon stood at the room's front. He moved his hands with their usual fluid deftness as he demonstrated a bow line, but his words stumbled. "You make a loop," he said. "The rabbit comes out the hole, goes around the tree, and back down the hole." He looked up at his confused students. Beside him, Tasha stepped forward, tapping a screen that showed the knot structural diagram. "What Leon is demonstrating," she explained in her clear, melodic voice, "is the principle of a non-jamming loop. The distribution of force along the standing part prevents the bend from collapsing under load. For those of you with tendrils, focus on creating the initial bite by..." Leon provided the practical, intuitive knowledge. Tasha translated it into academic principles that the other students could grasp. Leaning in the doorway, unseen by the focused students, stood Director Sound and Boren, the groundskeeper. "The Concord Education Board has approved the curriculum on a provisional basis," Sound stated, her voice a flat report. "They await further data." Boren held up an Omnicore, its screen displaying a newly submitted file. He spoke in a deep rumble. "The board just accepted my final observational report. For the Concord's lead field observer for this sector, my recommendation makes the program permanent." Sound turned her segmented head to look at him. "Your file listed you only as groundskeeper,"